The age shouts that life is conquered by force, that achievement belongs to those who pursue with relentless haste. Yet philosophy teaches otherwise. The more a soul exhausts itself in pursuit of outcomes beyond its command, the more it departs from its own center. What is gained by such struggle is often no more than fatigue, while what is lost is the very composure in which clarity and strength reside. The Stoics discerned a higher law. They saw that creation is not the mere product of effort, but of alignment with the order that governs all things. To live is to be carried within a current greater than oneself. You may resist it, demanding that reality conform to private will, but resistance only breeds turbulence. To act in accord with it is to discover a strange paradox. What you most deeply long for often approaches when you cease to grasp for it with fevered hands. This is why Marcus Aurelius reminded himself to confine yourself to the present. His counsel was not an invitation to passivity, but to lucid engagement with what lies before you. The future cannot be commanded, the past cannot be reclaimed. To rebel against this truth is to shatter oneself against necessity. But to accept it is to recover the serenity from which action flows most effectively. There is a profound difference between exertion rooted in anxiety and action rooted in clarity. The first arises from the belief that you are incomplete until fortune delivers its gifts. The second arises from the recognition that completeness belongs already to the soul that governs itself. From that recognition, you act not to fill a void, but to give form to what is already whole within you. The doctrine of amor fati, the love of fate, emerges from this insight. If everything belongs to an ordered whole, then nothing is alien to the wise. To resist what arrives is to resist the nature of things themselves. To accept is not mere resignation, but an embrace of the fact that even what appears hostile may serve a hidden purpose. This acceptance does not abolish effort. It transforms its spirit. You still sow, but you no longer demand that the harvest bend to your impatient will. You act with diligence, yet you rest in the trust that the outcome belongs to a broader design. In this way, peace is not found by withdrawing from striving, but by refining its ground. The Stoic does not say, "Do nothing." He says, "Do what is within your power and release what is not." The fever of control dissolves, and in its place arises composure. This composure is not weakness. It is the soil of true strength. A calm mind can see what a restless one misses. A tranquil spirit has the power to attract order, where turmoil only multiplies disorder. Thus, the opening principle is simple and severe. Do not confuse force with mastery. What stands at the root of creation is not the exhaustion of endless exertion, but the harmony of inner will with outer law. The man who acts in harmony does not crumble when results differ from his vision, for he knows that life often shapes something greater than foresight could design. The man who wars against the nature of things, on the other hand, discovers that his greatest enemy is not circumstance but himself. This is why the Stoic path begins with surrender, not the surrender of action, but the surrender of illusion. You relinquish the belief that the universe must obey your timetable. You relinquish the craving that demands certainty before it can rest. You relinquish the desperation that binds your worth to events beyond your reach. And in relinquishing, you gain a treasure rarer than all conquest, freedom from inner captivity. Here then lies the first law of a life rightly ordered: align rather than grasp, act without compulsion, and trust the rhythm of the whole. For all things arise according to causes deeper than your sight. When you cease to fight them, you begin to see that the very current which seemed to oppose you is the same current that carries you toward fulfillment. To resist is to shatter. To align is to flow. To cling is to choke. To trust is to breathe. The Stoic summons you to this posture not as a tactic to gain every desire, but as a way of living that renders you unassailable. For when you have learned to act without desperation and to accept without fear, nothing the world withholds can diminish you, and nothing it grants can enslave you. Desire is not the enemy of the soul. Without it, existence would collapse into inertia. Yet desire becomes destructive when it is allowed to harden into dependency, when what was once a movement of the will transforms into a chain binding the spirit to conditions it cannot command. The Stoics never counseled the annihilation of desire, but its purification. They sought to strip from it the fever of need, leaving behind the calm flame of intention. The essence of this teaching lies in the distinction between wanting and needing. To want is natural. It is the motion of the soul reaching out toward what it judges fitting. To need is a distortion. It is to declare that without the desired object, one's peace is impossible. The first leaves the spirit free, the second enslaves it. For what you label as need, you place beyond your power, and in so doing, you surrender your sovereignty to fortune. Epictetus observed that wealth consists not in possessing many things, but in possessing few wants. His meaning was not a condemnation of abundance, but an unveiling of its hollowness when approached with hunger. For abundance pursued as necessity is never sufficient. Each gain breeds further grasping. By contrast, abundance encountered with detachment reveals its true form as something to be preferred, yet never required. The soul remains whole, whether it is granted or denied. This distinction formed the Stoic category of the indifferent. Life, health, reputation, possessions, all may be chosen if available, but none must be clung to. The wise recognize them as ornaments, not foundations. Peace does not collapse if they vanish, for peace was never built upon them. This posture may seem austere, yet it liberates. For to hold lightly is to cease radiating desperation, and desperation is the surest way to repel the very things one longs for. When desire is cleansed of attachment, it transforms from compulsion into preference. The soul may say, "I would welcome this outcome, yet I remain entire if it does not appear." In such words, there is maturity. They are not expressions of resignation, but of alignment. They acknowledge that the order of things exceeds the grasp of the individual, and that what seems like denial may conceal a higher gift not yet visible. To insist upon a single form of fulfillment is to mistrust the wisdom of the whole. To remain open is to affirm that life may know better than you what will complete your path. Thus, the discipline of detached desire is not the abandonment of aspiration, but its refinement. You continue to act, to labor, to pursue, but you no longer bind your inner worth to the outcome. You act because action is noble, not because result is guaranteed. You seek because seeking exercises the soul, not because possession defines its value. In this way, success, when it arrives, is received with gratitude rather than fever, and failure, when it arrives, is borne with composure rather than despair. The practice of this discipline requires vigilance. Each time desire stirs, you must ask, does this longing serve as a preference, or has it hardened into a condition for my peace? If the latter, you must loosen your grasp, for you are placing your serenity in a realm not yours to govern. It is not the object itself that enslaves you, but the belief that you cannot be whole without it. Break that belief, and the chain dissolves. The Stoic is not indifferent in the sense of apathy. He does not float above life without care. His indifference is a higher form of care for the integrity of his ruling faculty above all else. He may pursue wealth, but not at the expense of justice. He may welcome honor, but not at the expense of truth. He may cherish love, but not at the expense of reason. By subordinating all desires to the health of the soul, he ensures that desire never drags him into ruin. This discipline also reveals a paradox: detachment, far from repelling, often attracts. For the one who does not demand radiates sufficiency, and sufficiency draws others as naturally as thirst draws to water. This is not magic, but law, where neediness broadcasts lack, serenity broadcasts fullness, and fullness by its very nature invites increase. Therefore, learn to desire with open hands. Let your longings be like guests at a banquet, welcomed warmly, but not begged to remain. If they depart, you remain host to yourself. If they stay, you share in their company, without fear of loss. The banquet of life is always shifting, and he who clings to any single dish will miss the richness of the table. In the end, the greatest gift of this discipline is not what it brings, but what it removes: the torment of desperation. For once you cease to believe that your joy depends on what lies beyond your governance, you recover the only joy that can never be taken, the joy of a soul at peace with itself. And from that peace you act not as a beggar of fate, but as a participant in its order, free to move without chains. Time is divided in thought, but never in reality. The past withdraws beyond recovery, the future advances beyond prediction, and only the present remains accessible. Yet the human mind seldom abides here. It drifts backward in chains of memory, or forward in storms of anticipation. In both directions, it abandons its post, leaving the present moment, the only realm of action, unguarded. The Stoic discipline of presence begins with the recognition that nothing of value can be done elsewhere. To live in presence is to renounce illusion. The past, when pursued, yields nothing but repetition, for its events are fixed. The future, when seized upon, dissolves into conjecture, for it is not yet formed. But the present, though narrow, is infinite in depth. It is the point where choice is possible, where reason can direct the will, where the soul may either lose itself or come into harmony with nature. This is why Seneca declared that true happiness lies in the enjoyment of the present, without anxious dependence on the future. His counsel was not to deny memory or foresight, but to reassign them their proper roles. Memory should inform, not imprison. Foresight should prepare, not torment. To treat either as more real than the now is to elevate shadow above substance. Presence is not a passive state. It is an active discipline requiring vigilance against the mind's habitual flight. When awareness sinks into regret, it must be recalled what has been cannot be altered, but what is here can still be shaped. When awareness races toward fear, it must be steadied. What has not yet come cannot be controlled, but the choice at hand remains within command. The present is not empty. It is charged with all the possibilities that reason can guide toward order. The practice of presence is also the practice of purification. Each time the mind is gathered back from distraction, the will is cleansed of false burdens. You are no longer carrying the weight of imagined catastrophes, nor rehearsing the wounds of yesterday. You are holding only what exists, and what exists is always bearable when judged rightly. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that a man is never crushed by the present alone, but only by the weight he adds from other times. Thus, presence is not merely attention, it is liberation. It frees you from servitude to what is no longer yours, and from slavery to what is not yet yours. It restores authority over what has always been yours, the governance of your ruling faculty in this instant. The world may rage, fortune may turn, but the present remains the arena in which you decide whether to assent or withhold, whether to act in accord with virtue or to betray it. There is also a paradox hidden here. By ceasing to live in the future, you prepare the future more effectively. For every tomorrow is born from today, and the quality of your presence now determines the shape of what follows. Anxiety about the future breeds disorder in the present, which in turn corrupts the very future one fears. But clarity in the present lays foundations of strength, which ripple forward into time. The Stoic therefore regards each moment as sufficient in itself, yet also as seed for what is to come. He does not abandon foresight, but he refuses to be governed by it. He acts now with full measure, knowing that right action multiplies into right consequence. And if consequences do not conform, he remains unshaken, for he has already placed his peace in the present, where alone it can be held. To live in presence is to dwell at the intersection of necessity and freedom. Necessity because the moment is given, you cannot escape it. Freedom because within it lies the power of judgment and choice which nothing external can take. To neglect this discipline is to be absent from one's own life, waiting endlessly for an hour that never arrives. To embrace it is to stand fully where you are possessing yourself entirely, and in that possession to discover a sufficiency that no span of time can enhance. Thus, the call of philosophy is simple, yet severe: return to the present again and again until the habit of absence is broken. For only here is life lived, only here is virtue possible, only here is freedom real. Existence is not a smooth passage. It is woven with interruption, delay, and obstruction. To expect otherwise is to demand from life what it cannot give. The Stoics placed resistance at the center of their philosophy, not as a curse to be avoided, but as a necessity to be embraced. For resistance is not merely an obstacle, it is the medium through which strength is shaped. The untrained mind interprets resistance as hostility, as though the universe had turned against it. Yet resistance is impartial. It arises from the order of things themselves, which cannot bend to private will. To resent it is to add a second burden to the first. Not only must you bear what comes, but you must also bear your anger against it. To accept it is to cut the burden in half, and often to discover that what seemed a barrier was in truth a teacher. Marcus Aurelius preserved for himself a formula that has become the very emblem of Stoic resilience. What stands in the way becomes the way. The insight here is radical. An obstacle is not a negation of your path, but a redirection of it. Each impediment forces the soul to uncover within itself capacities that would otherwise remain dormant. Without resistance, patience would never mature, courage would never be summoned, endurance would never be tested. The qualities that make a soul whole are called forth only by opposition. Thus, resistance is not an external enemy, but an internal summons. It demands that you refine your judgments, what truly lies within your power, and what lies beyond it. It demands that you examine your impulses. Are they born of reason or of frustration? It demands that you cultivate composure. Can you face what arises without collapsing into complaint? Each demand, if met, strengthens the ruling faculty. The more it is tested, the more sovereign it becomes. To resist resistance is futility. To use it is wisdom. When you cease to battle reality, you no longer squander energy in resentment. That same energy can then be directed toward adaptation. What cannot be removed can still be approached with understanding, turned into material for growth. A stone in the path is a hindrance to the hurried, but a foundation to the one who sees how to stand upon it. The discipline of resistance also clarifies the meaning of control. You cannot dictate the arrival of difficulty, but you can dictate the manner of your response. This distinction divides freedom from bondage. If you demand that events be as you prefer, you will live in perpetual captivity to disappointment. If you demand only that your judgments align with reason, you will live in freedom even while circumstances are hostile. For in every case, the decisive element is not the event itself, but the interpretation you give it. There is also a hidden mercy in resistance. Delay is not always denial. Detour is not always defeat. What seems to withhold may in fact protect. What seems to hinder may in fact prepare. The narrowness of human sight cannot discern the total order. Trust that even resistance belongs to a wider coherence. This trust is not naive, it is practical. For whether or not you believe in a larger order, resistance remains. To meet it with bitterness is self-destruction. To meet it with trust is self-preservation. The Stoic therefore greets resistance not with despair, but with inquiry. What strength is this summoning from me? What lesson lies hidden in this disruption, in asking the mind shifts from victimhood to agency? Life ceases to be a battlefield where you are crushed and becomes a workshop where you are refined. To adopt this discipline is to embrace an invincible orientation. Obstacles will not vanish, but they will lose their power to disarm you. Each becomes raw material for your formation. Hardship then ceases to be an interruption of life and becomes part of its fabric. For the Stoic, the world is not against you, it is with you, shaping you even through what appears hostile. Thus, the principle stands: resistance is inevitable, but its meaning is yours to decide. It can be a wall against which you shatter, or a chisel that carves you into form. Choose the latter, and you will discover that every difficulty conceals within it the possibility of transformation. The human condition is marked by a constant temptation to hand over one's inner state to external powers. Praise elevates, blame crushes, fortune excites, loss devastates. In such a life, the soul is not sovereign, but a subject, its moods shifting with every change of circumstance. The Stoics regarded this as the deepest form of slavery, not bondage of the body, but captivity of the mind. To recover freedom, one must reclaim authority over what is properly one's own. Epictetus expressed this truth in unambiguous terms: no one can harm you without your consent. The statement is not about physical injury, but about the inner citadel, the faculty of judgment. If you assent to the impression that another's insult diminishes you, you are wounded. If you withhold assent, the insult dissolves into air. Authority resides not in the external blow, but in the internal decree. The essence of this discipline lies in recognizing the limits of control. Events, reputations, possessions, all stand outside the sphere of your command. To tether your peace to them is to surrender it to forces you cannot govern. But within the boundary of your power lie your judgments, your choices, your responses. These and these alone form the domain of freedom. To exercise authority here is to be invulnerable, for nothing external can enter without your permission. To cultivate inner authority is to draw a clear boundary between what belongs to you and what does not. Every time you say, "I cannot be at rest until this happens," you extend that boundary outward and weaken your rule. Every time you say, "My peace depends only on how I meet what happens," you reinforce the walls of the citadel. This is why Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the soul becomes dyed by the color of its thoughts. If your thoughts are borrowed from the judgments of others, your soul is painted in alien hues. If your thoughts are chosen in accord with reason, your soul remains its own master. The discipline demands vigilance, for impressions arrive uninvited, carrying with them suggestions of joy or despair. If allowed to pass the gates unchecked, they dictate your inner state. The task is to examine each: is this impression within my power or outside it? If outside, dismiss it. If within, shape it by reason. Thus, authority is preserved, and the self remains whole. To live without this discipline is to be perpetually at the mercy of circumstance. Your worth will rise and fall with the applause of others, your security will fluctuate with the market of fortune, your joy will depend on the fragile balance of external events. But to live with this discipline is to anchor the self in what cannot be taken, the capacity to judge, to choose, to act in accordance with virtue. Here lies the only throne that cannot be overturned. Inner authority is not isolation. It does not sever you from the world, but reorders your relationship to it. You still engage, still strive, still act with care. Yet you do so without surrendering your peace as collateral. You walk among shifting circumstances with the knowledge that they can touch the body, alter the course, but cannot touch the will unless you open the door. This is not detachment born of coldness, but composure born of clarity. The paradox is that once authority is reclaimed, your actions become more powerful, for you are no longer driven by desperation or fear. You do not chase approval, and so you act with authenticity. You do not cling to outcomes, and so you act with steadiness. In this way, the world often yields more readily to the one who does not beg from it. Freedom itself exerts a kind of gravity. Thus the Stoic summons you to this posture to hold the scepter of your life within, never delivering it to the shifting hands of chance or opinion. Guard the citadel, examine impressions, and choose your state deliberately. For in the end, no one rules you unless you permit it. The highest freedom is not to command others, but to govern yourself. The compulsion to act is one of the subtlest forms of bondage. The mind unsettled by uncertainty seeks relief in movement, as though motion itself were proof of mastery. Yet motion without necessity is not progress but dissipation, and effort without harmony is not strength but waste. The Stoics discerned that wisdom often lies not in the multiplication of deeds, but in the restraint that withholds them. Non-action in this sense is not idleness. It is the deliberate refusal to act where action would violate proportion. It is the discipline of letting what is unripe remain unripe, of allowing what is beyond one's reach to proceed without interference. For the order of things does not accelerate at human command. Seeds germinate in silence, processes unfold in hidden places, and outcomes mature according to causes invisible to impatience. To act before the time is to spoil both the act and the end it seeks. This discipline demands the recognition that stillness is not emptiness, but potency. In stillness, the soul is not surrendered to paralysis. It is collected, vigilant, and prepared. When the compulsion to force subsides, attention clarifies. One sees more accurately what belongs to the present and what belongs to time itself. By refusing premature interference, one aligns with the deeper rhythm of reality. To many, non-action feels intolerable because it denies the illusion of control. To wait is to acknowledge dependence upon conditions beyond oneself. Yet this very acknowledgement is the threshold of wisdom. For in yielding the fantasy of total mastery, one reclaims mastery of the one domain that remains the governance of desire and aversion. The soul learns to say, "I will act," when reason declares the time. And until then, I am sufficient in restraint. The discipline of non-action also guards against the corrosion of restlessness. For restlessness is the true enemy of presence. It fills silence with noise, emptiness with clutter, uncertainty with rash decisions. To resist it is to affirm that dignity does not depend upon constant movement. A sovereign does not prove his rule by frantic gestures. He proves it by composure, by acting only when the act is fit. The same law holds for the inner sovereign. This discipline further reveals the distinction between action and reaction. Reaction is the impulse that seeks escape from discomfort. Action is the measured response born of clarity. By pausing, by allowing silence to intervene, reaction is disarmed. What emerges instead is the deliberate deed free of compulsion. Thus, non-action is the womb of true action, the stillness from which authentic motion arises. To master non-action is to accept that you are part of a whole whose pace exceeds your will. You may sow, but you cannot command the season. You may prepare, but you cannot summon the appointed hour. To struggle against this truth is to multiply frustration. To accept it is to move only when movement is aligned with necessity. In this way, the discipline of non-action is not negation, but harmony. It does not deny your role in the order of things. It teaches you to recognize its limits. Therefore, the wise do not ask, "What can I do at this moment to relieve my unease?" They ask, "Is action at this moment in accord with reason, or is restraint the greater accord?" If the latter, they remain still without shame, knowing that restraint is itself a form of strength. For to refrain from needless motion is to preserve the soul's clarity, and clarity is the foundation of all right action when its time arrives. The Stoic summons you then to embrace stillness, not as weakness, but as discipline. To act when the moment is ripe, and to withhold when it is not. To discover that the truest form of authority lies not in the number of deeds performed, but in the power to decide when deeds are necessary. Non-action is not absence. It is presence, refined presence that refuses to scatter itself in restless gestures. It is the confirmation that the soul rules itself, that it is not enslaved by impatience, not deceived by the illusion that constant effort is the measure of worth. In this discipline, you learn that silence can be fertile, that waiting can be strength, and that stillness itself can be the highest form of action. Gratitude is often misunderstood as an ornament, a polite gesture added to life when things proceed according to desire. Philosophy reveals it as something far more essential. Gratitude is not a reaction to fortune, but a discipline of perception. It is the deliberate decision to view existence through the lens of sufficiency, rather than lack, to align judgment with what is given, rather than with what is withheld. The untrained soul gravitates toward absence. It counts what is missing, dwells on what has departed, and measures life against ideals it cannot reach. Such a posture breeds restlessness, for desire is infinite while circumstances are finite. Gratitude interrupts this spiral by reversing the gaze. Instead of fastening attention on deficiency, it directs the mind to what is present. In doing so, it transforms scarcity into fullness, not by altering events, but by altering the standard by which events are judged. For the Stoics, gratitude was not sentiment, but rational alignment. Everything that happens arises from the same order that sustains the whole. To curse any portion of it is to curse the whole itself. To bless it is to enter harmony with the cosmos. Thus, Marcus Aurelius could remind himself, even when anticipating treachery or ingratitude from others, that these too belong to the nature of things, and that by recognizing this, he could preserve composure. Gratitude, then, is not naive optimism, but the recognition that all things contribute to the texture of life, even those that appear hostile. This discipline guards against the illusion that happiness is postponed until conditions are perfected. The one who cannot be grateful now imagines that joy lies in a future arrangement of events. But when that future arrives, the same habit of discontent persists. Gratitude breaks this illusion by training the mind to rest in what already exists. It teaches that enough is already present, and that peace does not depend on acquisition, but on attention. Gratitude also reconfigures the relationship between the self and adversity. Challenges are no longer interpreted as violations of happiness, but as instruments of formation. To give thanks even for trial is to affirm that nothing is wasted, that every encounter has value for the cultivation of the soul. This is not denial of hardship, but transformation of its meaning. Suffering stripped of purpose crushes. Suffering endowed with purpose refines. Gratitude provides that purpose by interpreting all things as part of a larger order in which growth is possible. The discipline further extends to the smallest details of existence. Breath continuity of life. The capacity to think and choose these are often ignored because they are constant. Yet they are precisely the foundations upon which all else depends. To neglect them is to despise the roots while demanding the fruit. Gratitude restores proportion by honoring what is fundamental. In doing so, it protects against the arrogance that assumes entitlement to life's gifts and replaces it with reverence for their contingency. This practice does not ask you to ignore what is difficult or to pretend that pain is pleasure. It asks only that you acknowledge what remains, even within pain, the resilience of the spirit, the companionship of reason, the possibility of virtue. Gratitude does not erase wounds. It prevents wounds from being interpreted as total loss. By recognizing what endures, it keeps the soul from collapsing into despair. In this sense, gratitude is not merely receptive but creative. It generates an atmosphere in which the soul flourishes. When the mind affirms what is present, it radiates a sense of completeness, and completeness diminishes desperation. A spirit that no longer clings in need is freer, calmer, and more capable of acting with clarity. Gratitude thus feeds directly into strength. It transforms the inner state from scarcity to sufficiency, from craving to composure. The Stoic conclusion is that gratitude is not optional, nor is it decorative. It is the rational posture of a soul that understands its place in the order of things. To practice gratitude is to acknowledge that you already possess the conditions for peace, for virtue, and for harmony. To neglect it is to live in permanent exile, chasing after what will never satisfy. Therefore, the discipline of gratitude is the discipline of reality itself. It aligns perception with truth, affirms the value of what is given, and frees the soul from the tyranny of endless want. To be grateful is to be rich, not because one has acquired much, but because one has recognized that what is essential cannot be taken. In this recognition, the soul stands complete. The pursuit of more is endless, for each attainment shifts the horizon of desire. What is gained quickly becomes ordinary, and the soul discontent with the familiar hungers again. The Stoics confronted this cycle with a principle both austere and liberating: the recognition of enough. To embrace enough is not to renounce aspiration, but to free it from distortion. It is to know that the worth of life does not expand in proportion to accumulation, and that sufficiency lies in relation, not in quantity. Poverty, they taught, is not defined by the absence of possessions, but by the insatiability of craving. He who measures himself against what he lacks is always poor, no matter how full his storehouse. He who measures himself against what he has is already rich, even if fortune has given little. Enough is therefore not an economic condition, but a spiritual orientation. It is the refusal to bind contentment to external increase, and the decision to anchor it in the inner governance of desire. The recognition of enough is a correction of judgment. For discontent arises not from what is truly lacking, but from the belief that one cannot be whole until more is added. This belief enslaves the soul, for it ties peace to a horizon that always recedes. To break this illusion is to reclaim freedom. The one who can say, "I have sufficient," possesses a dignity untouchable by fortune, because his happiness no longer depends on the next acquisition. This does not mean stagnation. The Stoic does not forbid striving, but he purifies its motive. Ambition distorted by need becomes servitude to outcomes. Ambition guided by sufficiency becomes the play of freedom. When you know you are already enough, you can pursue without desperation, strive without fear, and release without collapse. Action becomes an expression of abundance rather than of lack. Thus, enough does not negate movement. It sanctifies it. The discipline also guards against vanity. Without enough, the soul is lured into constant comparison, seeking validation in the measure of others. With enough, that measure dissolves. The worth of life is no longer borrowed from opinion or contingent on superiority. It is drawn from the simple fact of being. To rest in this is to discover a serenity that competition cannot grant. For in the endless contest for more, no one wins. All are enslaved by the same hunger. Grasping after excess also blinds the eye to what already is. The mind fixed on what lies beyond reach fails to perceive the richness present in what is within. The discipline of enough restores vision. It reminds you that life is already adorned with goods, overlooked the capacity to reason, to act with justice, to cultivate the soul. These cannot be increased by addition, for they are perfect in themselves. To recognize them is to discover that abundance has always been present, though concealed by distraction. In this way, enough is not deprivation, but liberation. It releases the soul from the tyranny of insatiability, so that it may rest in what is secure. For what depends on accumulation is always vulnerable to loss, while what depends on sufficiency endures even in deprivation. The wise man, deprived of wealth, does not consider himself ruined, for he did not equate wealth with worth. He retains his freedom because his peace was never mortgaged to fortune. The paradox revealed by this discipline is that contentment itself becomes a source of further abundance. To the one who radiates sufficiency, life often grants more, not because he demanded it, but because his composure attracts it. Yet whether abundance arrives or not is irrelevant, for his happiness is not altered by its coming or its absence. He remains steady, for enough has already secured his foundation. Thus, the Stoic summons you to renounce the illusion that happiness lies in endless increase. Let sufficiency be your measure. Say to yourself, I am already whole, and whatever is added may be welcomed but not required. With this recognition, ambition is purified, comparison is dissolved, and craving is subdued. What remains is freedom. The freedom to pursue without chains, to enjoy without fear, and to endure without despair. The one who has discovered enough possesses a wealth that no fortune can bestow and no misfortune can remove. He stands complete not because he has all things, but because he no longer believes he must. To live falsely is to fracture the soul. Each compromise with pretense divides the inner from the outer, the genuine from the performed. When this division becomes habitual, a person loses not only the clarity of self, but also the capacity to align with nature. For nature has given each being a distinct character, and to abandon it in pursuit of appearances is to set oneself at war with the very essence one was meant to embody. The Stoics regarded authenticity not as indulgence, but as duty. The ruling faculty, when guided by reason, is designed to speak truth, to choose according to conviction, and to live in accordance with its own understanding of the good. To silence it out of fear of disapproval or hunger for praise is to corrupt its function. Just as the eye betrays itself if it refuses to see, so the soul betrays itself if it refuses to live authentically. The discipline of authentic expression begins with clarity of values. Without this clarity, the individual becomes a mirror of shifting expectations, adopting whichever mask secures temporary acceptance. But masks, though useful for concealment, are heavy to bear. They require constant adjustment, endless vigilance, and the exhausting maintenance of contradictions. What begins as strategy ends as slavery for the self is never permitted to be at rest. Authenticity is liberation from this bondage. It is the refusal to counterfeit one's inner life for the sake of external reward. It does not mean harshness or disregard for others, but the quiet decision to let word and deed correspond to conviction. The authentic person does not calculate constantly how he is perceived. He calculates whether his actions are in accord with reason. His worth is not borrowed from opinion, but secured by integrity. This discipline does not shield from cost. To live authentically may alienate those who demand conformity, may close certain doors that can only be opened by flattery or deceit. Yet the price of authenticity is never as high as the cost of its absence. For the inauthentic may gain acceptance, but he does so at the expense of his own unity. He appears whole to others, but feels divided within. No external honor can compensate for this inner dissonance. Authenticity also clarifies desire. When one pursues what is not truly one's own success, itself becomes hollow. The prize once obtained reveals its emptiness, for it never corresponded to the soul's genuine longing. Only when the pursuit springs from inner conviction does attainment bring peace. In this way, authentic expression is not only a moral demand, but a practical necessity. Without it, one can spend a lifetime striving toward goals that cannot satisfy. The Stoic vision insists that alignment with one's true nature is the condition of flourishing. Each individual has within a measure of reason a capacity for justice, a potential for virtue. To obscure these with deception is to obscure the very instruments by which the good life is lived. To let them shine openly even when misunderstood is to honor the purpose for which one exists. Authenticity also strengthens resilience. For the one who lives according to borrowed identities must constantly fear exposure. His peace is fragile, depending on the maintenance of appearances. The authentic person, by contrast, has nothing to conceal. His speech and his heart are one. What he loses in approval, he gains in unassailable stability. Misfortune may strip him of possessions or reputation, but it cannot strip him of self, for self is precisely what he has chosen to preserve. Thus, the discipline of authentic expression is not a luxury, but a foundation. Without it, the other disciplines lose coherence. Gratitude, presence, resistance, and authority all presuppose a self that is whole, not fractured by duplicity. To practice authenticity is to ensure that the inner and outer man are one, that action arises from conviction rather than disguise. The Stoic summons you, therefore, to this unwavering posture, to speak what reason commands, to pursue what accords with your nature, and to let the image presented to the world be a faithful reflection of the soul within. For only then is life aligned with truth, and only then can the self stand unbroken, regardless of how fortune or opinion may shift. Authenticity is the courage to be without disguise. It is the discipline that secures unity, the unity that secures peace, and the peace that secures freedom. Impatience is the unrest of the soul against the order of time. It demands that what is not yet mature should already be ripe, that what is concealed should already be revealed, that what belongs to the unfolding of causes should yield instantly to desire. Yet nothing in nature bends to such insistence. The seed will not flower because one commands it. The dawn will not hasten because one longs for light. To live wisely, the Stoics taught, is to entrust oneself to the rhythm that exceeds one's will. This discipline is not passivity but alignment. It does not counsel withdrawal from effort, but the purification of effort from compulsion. One continues to sow, to build, to prepare, yet releases the demand that outcomes conform to one's private schedule. For the timing of events is never fully in human hands. 1,000 causes intersect beyond one's vision. The wider order arranges what the narrow mind cannot foresee. To rebel against this is not strength, but blindness. To accept it is to discover serenity even in delay. The soul that cannot trust timing is condemned to perpetual frustration. It reads every pause as failure, every detour as punishment, every silence as neglect. But delay is not always denial, and deviation is not always loss. Often the interval is preparation, the strengthening of the self, the rearrangement of circumstances, the clearing of space for what is greater than what was first imagined. What feels like obstruction may be the universe refusing to grant too little, holding back until the measure is full. Trust in timing also protects against the arrogance of foresight. To insist that life deliver precisely what one demands and exactly when one demands, it is to presume a knowledge one does not possess. The Stoics urged humility before the vast design. You see only a fragment, yet you judge as though you behold the whole. To love fate is to accept that the hidden order may serve you better than your own designs, even when its wisdom is obscure. This discipline requires patience, and patience is strength. For the ability to wait without collapse is the mark of sovereignty. The impatient are ruled by their cravings, the patient rule themselves. In patience, one acknowledges dependence on what transcends control, yet one also affirms mastery over one's own response. Thus, patience is not weakness, but dual strength, submission to the order of causes, and dominion over the restless impulses that would resist them. To trust timing is also to remain present. The one who frets about when an outcome will arrive has already abandoned the moment in which life is lived. He sacrifices the certainty of now for the uncertainty of later, and in so doing, he loses both. But the one who trusts can rest fully in the present, knowing that the future will emerge when it is due. This trust does not diminish his diligence. It ennobles it, for each action is undertaken without the poison of anxiety. The paradox is that trust often delivers more than impatience ever could. For the anxious soul narrows its vision, grasping only at the form it has imagined. In that grasping, it overlooks the greater possibilities that time was arranging. The trusting soul, by contrast, holds its desire lightly. It acts with intention, but remains open, and in that openness it receives not only what was sought, but also what could not have been foreseen. Thus, the Stoic concludes, harmony with time is harmony with life. To demand haste is to quarrel with reality. To trust is to move with it. The wise act steadily release compulsion and accept the unfolding with composure. In this way, even delay is lived with peace, even uncertainty with dignity, and even loss with understanding. The discipline of trust in timing is therefore the culmination of all others. It unites presence, resistance, authority, and sufficiency into one posture. The calm assurance that the order of things is not hostile, that nothing comes too soon or too late, and that the soul which consents to this order is already in possession of freedom. The 10 disciplines are not fragments, but facets of a single whole. Each one considered separately appears as a principle. Taken together, they reveal a way of life. They are not methods for bending fortune to desire, but instruments for liberating the soul from captivity to fortune itself. The world remains what it is, shifting, unpredictable, resistant to command. Yet the one who embraces these disciplines discovers a freedom untouched by circumstance. The path begins with harmony. To cease resisting the order of things is to cease exhausting oneself in vain. Alignment with reality does not remove effort, but purifies it, transforming struggle into clarity. From this ground arises the discipline of desire, the recognition that longing must be guided by preference rather than need, lest the soul bind itself to conditions beyond its power. Detachment refines desire into freedom. Presence follows for only the moment before you can be governed. The past has withdrawn, the future is uncertain. Here alone lies choice. To remain present is to recover authority over life itself, to anchor attention where action is possible. Resistance then appears not as curse but as companion. Obstacles cease to be denials and become instruments of formation, sharpening patience, endurance, and courage. From this recognition flows inner authority. The soul sees that what is decisive is never the event, but the judgment passed upon it. To guard the citadel of assent is to preserve sovereignty. To surrender it is to become a slave to impressions. Authority over oneself is the root from which all freedom grows. Out of that root comes the discipline of non-action, the refusal to mistake restlessness for necessity. To wait with composure is to allow reason to dictate timing rather than anxiety. Stillness becomes a form of power. Gratitude then completes the correction of perception. By choosing to affirm what is given rather than mourn what is withheld, the soul discovers sufficiency even amid imperfection. This sufficiency matures into the recognition of enough, the understanding that contentment is not postponed until increase but available in the present measure. With enough, craving is subdued and dignity restored. Authenticity follows naturally. If one has recovered sufficiency, one has no need to wear masks. The soul can live according to its own reason, speaking truth, without fear, pursuing its path, without compromise. Authenticity dissolves division within unifying the self. And when the self is unified, it can finally trust timing. For the one who is whole does not demand that life conform to his urgency. He acts with steadiness, releases compulsion, and accepts the rhythm of the whole with serenity. Seen together, these 10 disciplines form not a ladder of ambition, but a circle of sovereignty. Each strengthens the others. Gratitude nourishes presence. Presence sustains resistance. Resistance deepens authority. Authority clarifies authenticity. Authenticity rests upon sufficiency. Sufficiency requires gratitude again. The path is not linear, but harmonious, a rhythm of practices that interweave into the fabric of a free life. The Stoics never promised immunity from hardship. They promised something greater: invulnerability of the ruling faculty. Storms will come, losses will arrive, betrayals will wound, death itself will claim the body. But none of these can compel the soul to surrender its judgment. None of them can dictate whether one lives in accord with reason, whether one consents to virtue, whether one stands at peace within. Thus, the closing call is simple and severe: reclaim yourself. Do not place your freedom in the hands of fortune, nor your peace in the verdict of others. Guard the citadel of your mind, discipline your desires, abide in presence. Transform resistance, exercise authority, embrace stillness, practice gratitude, affirm sufficiency, live authentically, and trust the rhythm of time. In this, you will not abolish hardship, but you will abolish slavery to it. You will not remove uncertainty, but you will remove desperation before it. You will not command the universe, but you will consent to its order with dignity. And in that consent, you will find the highest form of sovereignty, a soul unshaken, at peace with itself, aligned with the whole.